Hi guys, welcome back to the next part of the series. Today we're going to continue with the tertiary details and we're going to do a couple of more passes here and there on the volcano so that we can get it as nice as possible. So as you can see, one of the elements that I'm noticing is that when we go to the side, these things are booking out too much. So I'm going to start with my smooth brush, just smoothing them out, and then we're going to jump into the scrape brush and just like push them in. So by pushing them in, we should have a way more like a reasonable height for these elements, which should be blending in with the rest of the axe, right? So we don't want this thing to be taking over the whole element. For instance, this one right here, I definitely want to make this really sharp. It's kind of like what's the word? Hardened rock, right? Like when you throw water in a video game to lava and you get this sort of like floor, like a stone floor or something. That's kind of the stuff that we want to have here. Yes, we can have a couple of elements, but if we make this thing poke way too much, that might complicate the bakes later on, because the more distance there is from a bake to the actual geometry, the more complicated the bake system is. So yeah, let's keep it simple for now. There we go. Now, another thing that we can do here is try to match as close as possible the concept. So for instance, if we go again to clay strips, I'm going to do a Control R real quick. And now that we have this, I'm just going to start like sculpting some of these stones a little bit better. So for instance, this part right here, this part is going to like collide eventually with the metal frame. So it might not be a bad idea to just like completely like bridge this right here. So all of that area, we can just bridge it very nicely and make this all stone. And then as we keep going here, you can see that we see this shape. So I would expect to see this shape right here. So like a circular shape. And there's a hollow point right here. It doesn't have to be perfect again, but the closer we can get to the concept, the better. So right in here in the middle, as you can see, there's like a little island. So might as well just draw that little island right there. And then in front of this little island, we have the shape. Actually, I can't nail that shape. Very close there. There we go. Now let's just add a little bit more volume. Now, all of those like little islands, like this guy right there and stuff like that, I do like to, I am going to add them, as you can see right here, but I'm not going to add like the super tiny ones. If we need to add them later in texture, it's going to be a little bit easier, because again, if we keep them in here, it's going to be a little bit complicated to bake them down properly. So I'm going to use a little bit of scrape brush here to make this more stone-like. There we go. We got this line right here, which touches this element right there, roughly. All of this goes into towards the bands. So one thing that is important is to try to keep the sort of like visual shape of visual language. So as you can see, everything's kind of like moving up like this. So all of the lines are going to be flowing in that direction. And if we're not going to be seeing them because they're going to be covered by the metal bands, but we do want to have this sort of like language all around our piece. Again, we can bring like another one, a small triangular one right there. Let's bring another one right there. And then from this shape right here, which is this one right there, there's a little bit more space before we have this like big stone right there. Let's do the scrape again. Flatten this one. Let me zoom out a little bit so I can see more of the stuff. There we go. Then we have this one. This one's very important, I think, because it's kind of like an arrow. It's kind of like pointing, right? So anytime you have a shape that's very graphical, we definitely want to capture that one. Here, another thing that we can do is the draw sharp. The draw sharp is another great tool that we can use to start carving in and generating this sort of like flow that we're seeing. And as you can see, this also gives us a very natural progression towards the stone thing. Now, I don't have this big shape right here. As you can see, it's divided into multiple smaller shapes. So I'm going to start using again my draw sharp to break some of these pieces down into smaller chunks. And here I can actually talk about a very cool like design concept that happens in the world. And that is that you will never have, or it's very like difficult for you to have something that just like spontaneously appears on an object. So for instance, all of these stones right here, it makes sense to start with big chunks, medium chunks, smaller chunks, and then no chunks. Okay, so we're gonna go from very, very few chunks, or very, very big chunks here on the volcano, to very small chunks right here on the axe. And this sort of like breakup where things go from little to bigger, or from bigger shapes to smaller shapes, this is very, very common. If you look up, for instance, like a lion or like a giraffe, you're gonna see that they have this sort of like similar things happening on their spots. Like the spots will not just start appearing; they will start with small spots, and they will start like growing bigger and bigger until you get like the main chest part of the animal. Same for like horns and the spikes, the scales, like all of these elements that we sometimes see in creatures. It's very important that you never do it as like just like something that's poking out of the skull or something. It's always a gradient, or sort of like a transition that goes from like no element to having more elements. There we go. So for instance, here kind of feels logical to have some sort of like, again, stone effect. And look at that. I mean, just like those elements poking out, is, I think it's really, really helping. And then what we can do is, if we can really want to like go the extra mile, is start playing around with each individual one of these stones so they look as nice as they can. So for instance, with draw sharp, we can go to this one right here and start carving in. See that? Again, for instance, here, let's just add the sort of like details that we would expect to see from the stones that we have up here. All of these lines and cracks on the surface. Remember that you can use the draw sharp inversely to generate some like more intense lines as well. And it's going to be a very cool way in which we're going to be incorporating the sort of stone design everywhere that we see it. For instance, another thing, this is a sort of like a Bob Ross style advice, but be aware of the happy little accents every now and then. So for instance, this like blob that I got right there, I know it doesn't perfectly match what we had on the concept, but it looks really cool, so I'm just gonna use it. It's kind of like a little peninsula right there on the stone. It's gonna allow me to generate a very, very interesting shape on that particular rock. So happy little accidents and like improvisation every now and then. I personally, again, in my professional experience, it has helped me quite a bit to get some interesting results. I know not every single art director and every single team will appreciate it, unfortunately. But I find it's one of those like artistic natures that we all have. Like when we're doing something, yes, we're following a concept, yes, we're following a guideline, but every now and then we're gonna have a little bit of inspiration, or we're gonna want to add a little bit of our own stuff into it. So I personally don't see it as a bad thing. I actually encourage my artists here at the studio to do that every now and then. Again, of course, following the indications and the main objectives of the project, but I give them the artistic liberty to give iterations or options whenever we're exploring certain things to find things that I didn't think about. So yeah, look at that. Not freaking bad. And of course we got this like on both sides. I think we're missing a couple of like pieces over here, so kind of want to add, gonna make a little big of a better one right there. Let's see if we can add like some small. There we go. There we go. So as you can see, this looks like it's breaking down and it's going all the way over here. Now, this one is really like interesting to me because as you can see, it's really close to the blade. And I feel like ours right now, it's not really looking like that. So I'm actually going to go with my grab brush here. And all of these stones, I'm just going to like push them forward a little bit more. And this one's I'm going to bring them back a little bit more. And what this will accomplish is it's going to accelerate, or it's going to give more weight to this upper part than it is going to do it on the lower part. And that will, or should allow me to get a nicer effect on the blade as well. So yeah, not bad. Let's give some love to this part over here now, because as you can see this area right here on the back, closer to the hammer, there's not a lot of stuff. It looks like a very like big chunk of rock, but I want to make sure that it looks like a good chunk of rock. So I'm gonna go with my clay strips over here, and we're gonna start adding some volume here. I know we need to kind of like taper this down as we go towards the hammer. Like the hammer connection is going to be on this part right here. So I definitely want to keep that a little bit more flat. But then we're going to use, again, our scrape brush. Just start creating. Now, this is another principle. I don't think we've mentioned this before. This is a principle I learned from a very talented artist named Vitaly Vulgarov. And when he designs, he's a hard surface guy. And when he designs like robots and things like that, he mentions that it's important for us as artists to leave certain areas where there's not a lot of things going on. And the reason why that is important is because our human brain has a hard time analyzing areas that are really complex. So when we see an area that has a lot of details and a lot of like cuts and a lot of things and this and that and whatever, we just end up ignoring it pretty much. So we don't see it as much. We don't see the areas. We just see it as noise, and that pretty much breaks the whole purpose of what we're doing, right? Now here on this area, I'm also going to start like carving in a little bit of the shape of this metal bit. Like I would expect that metal bit to create some sort of like hole in there as well. Remember that we can always adjust this later on when we have all of the pieces together, but it's not a bad idea to start like seeing how all of this falls together as a piece. There we go. So I kind of feel like I want to have another like big like stone detail around this area. So again, I'm going to go to clay strips. And I'm going to follow this sort of line right here to create like a final shelf. I'm going to carve in here as well. There we go. Let's use our draw sharp now. So create that sort of like division. Because all of this is going to be covered by a lot of like metal bits and stuff. So that's another thing. It's important that we understand the whole concept. So that's why we did the analysis earlier on, because that way I know that I don't need to spend as much time on these areas, because eventually we're going to be adding those elements in here, and that's going to just make everything like obsolete, right? Like we don't want to spend time on something that's not going to be seen. It's a very, very important rule of thumb for the 3D world. This, I do feel like this frontal piece is working nice. I probably can like improve it a little bit here as well. Just a little bit better there. There we go. There's something that I need to do with this one. It looks weird. That thing looks weird right there. I think I'm gonna go kind of like a dragon, like what I would do with a dragon, and just do like scales, like steps with scales. So something like this. That looks a little bit better, I think, because the other one, it was too obvious that it was asymmetrical, right? So something like this. Again, I'm not worrying too much about that specific part because we're gonna have this big metal chunk holding that area. And then on this part right here, same thing. Like I'm just gonna keep that as a big stone right there, and then like two side stones on this area. So that way we have that like volcano cap right in that point. So there we go. Not bad, right? Not bad for what? Like 6 hours that we've been doing this, I think. I think we're roughly at the 6 hour mark. Again, as I mentioned, take as much time as you need. Don't try to rush it. Don't try to match my pace. If you can do it faster and better, then be my guest. However, I do encourage you to take your time to make sure that you get an excellent piece for yourself. And there we go. So from our initial blocking, which was just a super sad pair of cubes and planes and stuff, to this, I think we're in a really, really good position, my friends. I'm really happy on how this is turning out. So I'm going to stop right here, my friends. I am going to do just a little bit of extra touch up on the off camera to get a little bit of just a couple of fixes here and there, but I don't want to repeat myself too much. So I'm just going to do a little bit of touch up off camera to finish some like tertiary details. And in the next one, we're going to be adding some alphas. We're going to go over alphas again to just get this very, very nice detail everywhere. We're going to sculpt a little bit of the bubble up here. It's going to be very, very important as well to make it really look like lava. And yeah, after that, we're going to start with the I think we're going to continue with the blade, actually. We're going to do the blade first. So yeah, hang on tight, and I'll see you back on the next video.